What if the only person who believed your daughter could walk again wasn't a doctor, wasn't even old enough to drive, but a kid with duct-taped boots and no home to go to? What if he wasn't offering hope to sell, but carrying it like it was the only thing he had left? This isn't a story about miracles handed out in white coats. It's about one quiet boy who refused to stop showing up, and a grieving father who realized that healing might come from the most unexpected place of all. You think you know how this ends, but ask yourself, what would make a grown man put his faith in a stranger half his size? And what happens when that stranger is right? But first, leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts. Jonathan Reeves had money, connections, and more business cards than friends, but all of that meant nothing sitting outside the Children's Medical Center in Birmingham with his daughter Isla asleep in the back seat. 6 years old, once a wild little whirlwind of scraped knees and fearless tree climbing, now paralyzed from the waist down after a freak accident no one saw coming. Jonathan carried her in like always, arms wrapped tight like she might vanish, ignoring the biting cold that painted the air. What he didn't ignore, because he couldn't, was the voice that stopped him just a few feet from the hospital entrance. "Sir, I can make your daughter walk again." Soft, steady, certain. Jonathan turned to see a kid no older than 9, bundled in a hand-me-down coat, one boot held together with duct tape, and a face too calm for his age. "You say something to me?" Jonathan asked. "I said I can help her walk again," the boy replied, like he was offering directions to the gas station. Jonathan stared at him hard, not because he was offended or confused, but because of how the words were said. "That's not funny." "I wasn't joking," the kid said, and didn't blink. He just stood there, holding a notebook under one arm, like this whole thing was normal. Jonathan turned away without another word, but inside the hospital, while doctors listed all the reasons not to hope, that voice followed him like a shadow. "I can help her walk again." Not a question. Not a maybe. Just a fact, delivered by a kid with cracked glasses and shoes that looked like they'd walked across every mile of disappointment. When they came out hours later, Jonathan thought maybe the kid would be gone. But no. There he was again. Same box. Same notebook, watching, waiting. "You again," Jonathan muttered, walking over. "You think this is a joke?" "No, sir." "You don't know her, you don't know us, so why would you say something like that?" "Because I can help," the boy said, like it was the simplest thing in the world. "My mama was a physical therapist. She taught me stuff before she passed. Said the body remembers even when it forgets." Jonathan didn't want to believe him, but he couldn't shake the stillness in the kid's eyes, like he knew something nobody else did. "I'm not giving you money," he said. "I didn't ask for money," the boy replied. "Then what do you want?" Jonathan asked. The boy took a breath. "Just 1 hour. Let me show you." Jonathan turned to his daughter, still in his arms, eyes half closed. Then back to the boy. "Fine. Harrington Park. Tomorrow at noon. Don't be late." The boy nodded once. "I'll be there." That night, Jonathan tried to lose himself in emails and spreadsheets, but the voice cut through the noise. Later, Isla poked her head into his office and asked, "Who is that boy?" "Just someone we saw at the hospital," he said. She looked up at him and said, "He looked like he believed it." "Believed what?" "That I could walk," she whispered. And in that moment, something cracked open inside Jonathan. Not belief, not yet, but something more dangerous. Hope. And the next day, just after noon, Jonathan pulled into that busted-up park. And sure enough, there was the kid, already waiting like he'd been expecting him all along. Most miracles don't come with hospital bills. Sometimes they come in gym bags and smell like cocoa butter and rice. That's what hit Jonathan the moment Zeke opened that ragged little duffel on the cracked pavement by Harrington Park's lonely oak tree. It wasn't high-tech, wasn't flashy, just a towel, a pair of clean socks, a tennis ball, a jar of cocoa butter, and a cloth-wrapped bundle, that turned out to be warm rice. Jonathan stared at it like the kid had pulled out a deck of Uno cards and called it physical therapy. "This your plan?" he asked, trying to keep the sarcasm out of his voice but failing. Zeke didn't flinch. "Yes, sir." Jonathan set Isla down on the park bench with a kind of careful hands that said he'd done it 1,000 times and still wasn't used to it. She looked around, shy but curious. Zeke gave her a little nod. "Hi, Isla," he said, not loud, not babyish, just real. She smiled. Not big, but it was there. "Hi." Jonathan blinked. That was new. Zeke got to work, no hesitation. He placed the warm rice pack gently across her thighs, checked her face. "Too hot?" She shook her head. "It feels nice." He waited a minute, then slowly started rotating her legs, not pushing, not pulling, just guiding. Jonathan stood nearby, arms crossed tight, unsure whether he wanted to watch or pretend none of this was happening. Zeke kept talking to her the whole time, but not about her legs. About cartoons, favorite foods, if she liked grape jelly or strawberry. It was like he knew her muscles were listening through her heart, not her body. Jonathan hated how much he wanted it to work. Hated the lump crawling up his throat every time Zeke said, "Try this," or "Tell me if that feels weird." It made no sense. A kid, barely out of elementary school, was doing what whole departments of trained adults hadn't done, and it was working, kind of. After about 30 minutes of stretches and quiet conversation, Zeke tapped her knee with his knuckle. "You feel that?" Isla frowned. "No." He nodded. "Okay." A few more minutes passed, same question, same answer. Then one more tap. "You feel that?" Isla blinked. "A little," she said, "like pressure." Jonathan froze. It wasn't much. Barely a sentence. But to a man who hadn't heard the word anything in months, a little felt like someone had knocked a brick out of the wall he'd built around his heart. He didn't say anything, just stared at his daughter and then at the boy in the duct-taped boots, who was acting like this was all perfectly normal. Zeke didn't celebrate, didn't smile. Just nodded like he expected it. "That's good," he said. "We'll try again next time." Jonathan cleared his throat. "Next time?" "Yeah," Zeke said, already packing up his towel and ball. "Takes time. Muscles need reminders." Jonathan didn't know what to say. Didn't want to admit how much those words hit. Because the truth was he needed reminders too, of what hope felt like, what progress looked like, what it meant to not feel completely useless as a father. They drove home in silence, but it was a different kind of silence. Not the heavy, helpless one that had settled into their routine these last few months. This one had something hanging in it. Something waiting. That night, Jonathan didn't work. He sat at the kitchen table watching Isla color, one crayon gripped in her hand like it weighed nothing. She didn't say much, just drew a picture of a stick figure with curly hair and a boy in a big coat beside her. Jonathan didn't ask who it was. He already knew. And the next Sunday, without thinking twice, he packed a fold-out chair in the back of the SUV, right next to the blanket and water bottle, and slid a little hope into the glove box, just in case. You ever see a 6-year-old cry not 'cause she's hurt, but 'cause she's done? Like deep in the bone, tear-streaked, fists clenched, nothing's ever gonna work kind of done? It ain't the loud cry that breaks you, it's the quiet one. That was Isla that Sunday morning. She didn't throw a fit, she didn't scream, she just stared at her unmoving legs like they'd betrayed her and said, "I don't want to try today." Jonathan didn't push. Not right away. He just looked at her, nodded once, and carried her to the car. But the whole ride to the park, she didn't say a word. Just sat in the back seat, arms crossed, eyes blank. And Jonathan? He felt like every failure she'd ever felt was stacked on his shoulders. When they got there, Zeke was already waiting. Same bench, same beat-up coat, like he didn't know what weather was. Jonathan opened the car door and lifted Isla out like always, but this time she didn't reach for him. Just let him carry her like a bag of bricks. "She doesn't want to do it today," Jonathan said. She's frustrated. I get it. Zeke stood, didn't flinch. What happened? He asked gently. Isla didn't look at him, just muttered, It's pointless. I tried this morning and nothing happened. Nothing. I'm tired of trying. Her voice cracked on the last word. Jonathan looked away. He didn't want anyone to see how much that sentence cracked him, too. Zeke didn't say, It's okay. He didn't toss out some feel-good line about faith or time. He just knelt beside her wheelchair and sat still for a minute. Then, without even asking permission, he started talking. You think I never get tired? He said quietly. When my mom got sick, we had no money, no place to go. I used to sit in a shelter watching her cry because she couldn't afford medicine. I sat there knowing I couldn't do anything about it, just His voice didn't tremble. It settled, like he wasn't telling a sad story, he was telling the truth. You're allowed to be mad. I was mad too. Still am sometimes. But if you stop now, the part of you that wants to walk might stop trying too. Isla's eyes finally lifted. She didn't blink, just stared at him like she was trying to figure out if he was for real, and then she whispered, I'm scared. That one word dropped like a stone into the silence. Jonathan turned sharply. It was the first time she'd said that out loud, not about pain, not about falling, just fear, raw and true. Zeke smiled. Not a grin, not pity, just calm. Me too, he said. But scared don't mean stop. It just means you're close to something big. Jonathan felt like his chest got kicked in slow motion. The way that voice spoke, it wasn't rehearsed. It was remembered. Zeke looked at Isla and reached for her hand. Can we try? Just once? She didn't nod, didn't speak, but her fingers curled slightly around his. That was enough. Jonathan helped her out of the chair, sat behind her like before, holding steady. Zeke guided her legs gently into position. Fourth try, he whispered, just like last week. They didn't rush, didn't count down. They just breathed, and then it happened. Her right foot, just the toes, shifted. Not much, but enough. Jonathan saw it. Zeke saw it. Isla felt it. No one said a word, 'cause sometimes hope doesn't need a microphone. Sometimes it shows up wearing a kid's coat and taped up shoes and sits right next to you until you believe again. All it takes is one person to move a toe, and a whole town starts moving with them. That's what happened after Isa's foot slid forward in that busted-up park. Nobody shouted, nobody called the news. But the next Sunday there were 2 more kids waiting near the oak tree. One had braces on both legs, and the other sat in a stroller too big for his body. Their parents stood off to the side, uncertain, embarrassed maybe, like hope was something they weren't sure they deserved anymore. Zeke didn't flinch. He nodded like this was all part of the plan, and pulled out a second towel like he'd brought it just in case. Jonathan watched him go from kid to coach in 10 seconds flat, explaining heat packs, pressure points, how to stretch without forcing. It wasn't just what he did. It was how he looked at every single kid like they mattered. More Sundays passed. More names, more parents who stopped pacing and started listening. Some cried, some laughed for the first time in months. Zeke never talked down to anybody. He showed them what his mama taught him, not like he was a genius, but like he remembered what being overlooked felt like. And Jonathan? He saw it all up close. He handed out water bottles, he helped with stretches. But the thing that stuck with him most was the moment he looked over and really saw Zeke, sitting up alone, eating nothing, brushing dirt off his notebook like it was glass. That's when he asked real low, like it was none of his business, "Hey, where do you even sleep?" Zeke shrugged, eyes still on the rice pack he was folding. Around. That word hit harder than expected, around. Like the world was a hallway and he was just trying to find a quiet corner to rest in. Jonathan didn't push, just nodded. But later that night he stood in the doorway of Isla's room, watching her hum while she drew, and couldn't shake the image of that kid brushing leaves off his bench. The next morning, over cereal, he cleared his throat and said, "You think Zeke would want to stay here for a while?" Isla looked up like he'd just offered to bring Santa Claus home for dinner. "Really?" she whispered. He nodded. "We got space, and no one should be sleeping around." So the next Sunday, after the session, after the last parent packed up their hope and child, Jonathan crouched down next to Zeke and said, "You ever think about having your own bed again?" Zeke blinked. "You mean like a guest room with clean sheets, a desk, and people who'd be glad to see you come home?" Zeke looked down at his hands. "You sure your neighbors wouldn't mind a kid like me?" Jonathan laughed. "After what you've done for my daughter, they better not say a word." Zeke didn't say yes right then, but the next morning he was standing outside their house with a blanket under one arm and a backpack on his shoulder, like he'd been waiting for someone to say, "You belong." Zeke moved in like he'd always been there, quiet, respectful, early to rise, first to help. But he still carried something heavy in that coat. Not attitude, not trauma he talked about. Just a kind of grief that never asked to be consoled. Like his mama's voice still whispered in his ear while he helped kids remember how to move. Word kept spreading. One kid turned to 4, then 10, and Jonathan, the man who used to measure value in quarterly earnings, started watching progress through inches, toe twitches, and knee bends. His heart, the one that had calcified from loss, started to thaw without permission. But peace like that don't go unnoticed for long. And the next Sunday, right between the cool breeze and the quiet chatter, someone new showed up. Not a parent, not a kid, someone holding a camera, watching, recording. Quiet, but not invisible. And Zeke? He saw them too. A miracle don't need marketing. But when something real starts happening, something that feels impossible and quiet and sacred, it doesn't stay quiet for long. A nurse walking her dog through Harrington Park on a lazy Sunday spotted Isa laughing on the grass, not just sitting in her chair but leaning forward, stretching, lifting her legs, playing. She hadn't seen that girl move like that in months. She didn't interrupt, just watched from a distance with her hand over her heart. Later, she told her sister about it over dinner. That sister worked in patient services at the hospital. She mentioned it to a therapist. Therapist told a chaplain. Chaplain told the director. You get the drift. The story moved like a whisper wrapped in wildfire. The next weekend, a reporter showed up. No camera crew, no flashy mic, just a notepad, a soft voice, and questions. Zeke didn't answer right away, didn't even look up. When Jonathan finally nudged him, Zeke just said, "Only if it's about the kids, not me." The reporter tilted her head. "You're the one they're all following." Zeke blinked. "Then write about why, not who." She did. A full-page Sunday spread. Black and white photo of the park. Kids on towels, parents with hopeful eyes. Headline read, "The boy who helped them move." They didn't use his full name, just Zeke. That's how he wanted it. And even though they respected that, the story spread. Donations came in, therapy bands, rice packs, foam rollers, stretch mats. A retired professor offered to tutor Zeke for free. A local nonprofit called and said they'd fund whatever equipment he needed. But Zeke didn't change. He didn't ask for anything. Same towel, same bag, same duct-taped boots. He still rolled out his mat at 11:45 sharp, still warmed the rice, still asked every kid the same 2 questions. You good and you ready? And Isa? She was more than good. She was moving. Not just her toes now. Ankles, knees, hips, even. Her laugh came easier. Jonathan found himself staying up late not with work emails but Googling pressure points, muscle memory, how to help without hurting. He stopped carrying the weight of fixing her and started sharing it. Morning routines became stretches. Nights became family dinners. The man who once measured time in contracts now measured progress in millimeters and smiles. Zeke didn't notice the shifts, or maybe he just didn't say much about them. But he felt them. The kids came earlier now. The parents brought coffee for each other. They called it Zeke's Circle, though he rolled his eyes every time someone said it. He still knelt the same way, still listened more than he spoke. But what had started as a quiet act of remembering his mama now rippled into something bigger. He wasn't a helper anymore, he was a movement. And then one quiet Sunday, while the air smelled like grass and someone nearby was playing slow music from a portable speaker, Isa looked at Zeke as he adjusted her knee and said, "I want to try standing." Just like that. No big announcement, no drama, just those 6 words. Jonathan froze. His hands stopped mid-reach. Zeke blinked, nodded slow, calm, steady, but his hands? They were shaking just a little, not from fear, from knowing something was coming, and it mattered more than anyone had said out loud. There's crying, there's laughing, and then there's the sound of a 6-year-old's sneakers hitting the ground after 6 months of silence. It doesn't ring loud like fireworks or fall like music. It lands like truth, heavy, real, the kind of sound your soul don't forget. That Sunday, Harrington Park didn't feel like a park. It felt like a church without walls. Parents held their breath. Kids stopped mid-laugh. Therapists stood still, mid-stretch. Zeke knelt in front of Isa like he always did. Same calm voice, same routine, except this time she wasn't just stretching. She was ready to rise. Jonathan moved behind her, hands steady under her arms, eyes locked on Zeke like they were both waiting for a miracle they weren't allowed to name out loud. Zeke gave the nod. Jonathan lifted gently. Isa's knees bent, then straightened. She locked them tight, and just like that, she stood. Not shaky, not quick, not propped up like a puppet. She stood. Her face didn't change much, but her eyes? Her eyes knew exactly what she'd done. Jonathan gasped, let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. Zeke blinked twice, rubbed his nose like dust had gotten in it. And Isa? She took a breath, then a step, then 2. And on the 3rd step she reached out and fell into her father's arms. He caught her mid-tears, mid-laugh, cradling her like she was born all over again right there on that patch of dirt and grass. "You did it," he whispered, voice breaking. "You really did it." Isa smiled into his chest and whispered back, "You said I could." Zeke, still kneeling, gave a little grin. "I said we'd try." Behind them, the crowd let go of its silence. People cried like they hadn't cried in years. Parents hugged. Kids pointed. One woman dropped to her knees and prayed out loud. Not to be seen, just 'cause she needed to. But Zeke didn't jump or cry or clap. He just sat back on his usual bench, hands folded, eyes calm like he'd watched this scene in a dream, and was just grateful to see it in real time. He didn't need a front row seat. He just needed it to happen. That night, back at home, Jonathan stood in the kitchen holding an untouched cup of coffee. Zeke sat at the table sketching something in his notebook, quiet as ever. Finally, Jonathan said it. "You changed everything." Zeke didn't look up, just nodded slightly. "It's what my mom would have done." Jonathan stared at him. This boy, this kid who came with nothing but duct-taped boots and a towel, had cracked open a world no doctor had touched. Not because he had magic, but because he kept showing up. Every week. No titles, no promises, just presence. There are people walking around this world wrapped in tape and silence, and most folks pass him by without a second glance. But every now and then, one of them's holding the blueprint to someone else's miracle. They don't brag, they don't chase credit, they just do. And if this story hit you somewhere deep, don't keep it to yourself. Somebody out there needs to believe again. Maybe you're their Zeke. Send you moy niskor, or maybe, just maybe, you've already met yours and didn't stop long enough to notice. Leave a comment below to let us know where you are watching from, and if you like fascinating stories like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have another incredible story, and there are many surprises waiting for you in the next parts.